Go ahead, Mom. Eat it. This kind of pastry is supposed to be good for memory. My daughter-in-law said that, at her own birthday party. The house was glowing with light. Crystal glasses clinked. Guests were smiling, raising toasts, laughing like nothing in the world was wrong. But on the porcelain plate in front of my wife, there wasn't the same elegant dessert everyone else was enjoying. It was a slice of tart, discolored, spotted with greenish-gray mold. My wife's hand trembled. My son saw it. And the part I still can't forget is that he turned his face away. Before I tell you what happened that night, if you're listening to this story and you believe a family should be built on respect, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. I read every single one. Because what happened after that plate was set down wasn't just a birthday party anymore. My son turned his face away, not because he didn't see it. I know Parker saw that plate. He was standing less than 2 meters from us, wine glass in hand, laughing with a group of business partners. His eyes passed over my wife, paused for a second on the discolored slice of tart, then moved on as if it were just an extra detail in the luxury of the evening. I sat on the bench for more than 30 years. I know exactly what deliberate silence looks like. The ocean breeze drifted across the wide balcony of the villa in the Hamptons. Stirring the white curtains, soft jazz played in the background. Crystal glasses touched with a clean, delicate sound. The party was organized so perfectly it almost felt sterile, from the table settings, to the lighting, to every polite practice smile. Only the plate in front of Joyce did not belong in that picture. My wife sat very straight. She has always carried herself that way. Even now, when her hands begin to tremble slightly from what we still call the early stage. She taught elementary school for 40 years. Composure became second nature to her. But I saw her fingers tighten slightly when Allison pushed the plate forward. "Don't embarrass Parker on his birthday," Allison said softly enough that only our table could hear, yet clearly enough for the nearby microphone to capture every word. Allison always chooses her position carefully. She smiles at the guests, but angles her body just enough to block their view. A perfect smile for photographs. A gentle voice that invites no suspicion. I didn't answer right away. I looked at the tart. The crust had darkened. The fruit on top showed faint greenish-gray spots, not natural fermentation like Allison claimed. I worked long enough in court to know the difference between an explanation and an insult dressed up as one. Joyce glanced at me. It wasn't a plea for rescue. She has never wanted me to stand in for her. It was a question. Where are we? In this house, I remembered last week, when I asked the technical team to upgrade the security system. I told Parker I wanted to make sure Joyce would be safe when we stayed here for the summer. 4K cameras, built-in microphones, coverage across the living room, dining room, hallway, and even the kitchen. Parker just smiled, said I was being overly cautious. Maybe he doesn't realize I've lived long enough to understand. Small things are often signs of larger ones. "Eat it, Mom," Allison continued, her voice soft as velvet. "I asked the kitchen to set this kind aside just for you. It's good for your nerves." A few guests behind us chuckled lightly, thinking it was a refined little joke. Joyce picked up her fork. Her hand trembled more than usual. I knew it wasn't because of her condition. I rested my hand lightly on the edge of the table. Not to stop her, just to let her know I was there. "That's very thoughtful of you," I said evenly, setting aside a special portion for Mom. Allison looked at me, a flicker of surprise. Then her expression smoothed back into public warmth. "We're family, Dad," she replied. "Family." The word sounded more like a strategy than a relationship coming from her. Parker stepped closer then, as if sensing the moment was stretching too long. He placed a hand on Allison's shoulder, protective, yet his eyes still avoided Joyce. "Dad, don't worry so much," he said. "Allison just wants what's best for Mom." I looked at my son for a second longer than necessary. I wondered when he began believing that kindness must come with humiliation attached. Joyce finally touched the fork to the tart. The soft cream collapsed, revealing the darker layer underneath. I didn't stand. I didn't raise my voice. I simply reached out and took the plate before the fork reached her lips. The movement was slow enough not to draw attention, firm enough for Allison to understand. I had made a decision. I placed the plate in front of me. No one beyond our table noticed. The music continued. The distant waves rolled on. I took my phone from my jacket pocket and snapped a clear photo. No rush, no secrecy. Allison tilted her head slightly. "What are you doing, Dad? I just want to save a moment," I said. "This birthday will be hard to forget." She laughed, but I saw her swallow. I set the phone down and looked at Joyce. She let out a quiet breath, as if she had just stepped over an invisible threshold. The party carried on as if nothing had happened, but in my mind, everything had shifted. I no longer saw a birthday celebration. I saw a test, and I knew, before this night was over, someone would have to explain very clearly why in this house, the house they believe belongs to them, anyone thought it was acceptable to place something already beginning to rot in front of my wife. And that test wasn't only for Allison. When I moved the plate to my side, Parker stepped back, half a step, just half. But a man who has read thousands of sworn statements understands what a small shift like that means. He did not stand between his mother and his wife. He chose to stand behind Allison. "She was just joking, Dad," Parker said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Everyone here understands." I didn't answer right away. I looked around. A few guests were glancing at us, polite curiosity in their eyes. They were used to pretending not to see discomfort. In Parker's world, image matters more than truth. Joyce still sat straight. She set her fork down. I saw her fingers tighten slightly against the edge of the tablecloth. Allison leaned in closer, her smile still flawless. "If Mom doesn't eat it," she whispered, "people will think she doesn't respect me. Today is my day." It sounded harmless, but what I heard underneath was this: Mom has to prove she's still stable enough to belong here. I turned to Parker. "What do you think?" I asked, my voice calm, no louder than before. He avoided my eyes. "I think Mom should try a little," he said. Allison prepared it. "In my career, I've seen intelligent men convince themselves they had no choice." Parker was doing the same. He didn't want conflict in front of his partners. He didn't want to ruin the party. He didn't want to be the son who stood with his mother. So he chose the easier path. Joyce took a quiet breath. She said nothing. Her silence reminded me of old parent-teacher meetings, when a child was being bullied but didn't want to make trouble. "Allison," I said, "are you certain this is the portion set aside for Joyce?" She nodded. Her eyes sharpened slightly. "Yes. I gave the kitchen very clear instructions." "Good," I replied. I lifted the plate again and gently turned it so the mold caught the light. Not enough to cause a scene, just enough for anyone nearby to see, if they were paying attention. A woman in the guest group frowned faintly. I noticed. Allison noticed too. Her hand tightened around Parker's arm. "You're making this awkward, Dad," she said, still smiling. "Awkward usually appears when something isn't right," I answered. The air at the table shifted. The music felt a little farther away. Parker lowered his voice. "Dad, there are important partners here tonight. You don't want what I asked." He hesitated. I knew the rest. He didn't want a fractured family image in front of people who might shape his career. Suddenly, Allison lifted a glass of red wine from the table and turned as if she had lost her balance. A dark red stain spilled across Joyce's silk dress, the one she had saved since our 30th wedding anniversary. "Oh." Mom spilled again. Allison sighed, loud enough for a few others to hear. "She really needs to be more careful." Joyce looked down at the stain, her lips pressed together. Her hands had never touched the glass. I looked at Allison. She wasn't whispering anymore. She was performing. "I'm so sorry," Allison said to the nearby guests. "My mother-in-law's hands shake lately. The doctor says her memory isn't what it used to be." A few sympathetic glances turned toward Joyce. Then I heard Parker add soft but clear, "Mom should really follow Allison's diet plan. She's done a lot of research." That was the moment I understood. Parker's earlier silence wasn't confusion. He had chosen a side. I stood up. No rush, no slamming the table. I simply stood, enough for those nearby to sense the shift. I took a napkin from a server and gently placed it over the wine stain on Joyce's dress. "It's all right," I told her. "We'll take care of it later." Then I turned to Allison. "Could you call the kitchen manager out here?" I asked. She paused. "For what I'd like to confirm the food storage procedures tonight," I said. "Just for peace of mind." Parker exhaled sharply. "Dad, you're overreacting." "Perhaps," I said, "but I'm used to clarifying matters before they become serious." Allison didn't call the manager. Instead, she leaned down close to Joyce. Her voice dropped, colder now. "If you don't cooperate, people will think you're unstable," she said. I'm only trying to help. I heard every word, and I knew the recording system above the chandelier heard it too. I set the plate of tart on a side table. I didn't throw it away. I didn't cause a scene. I took out my phone and sent a short message to my attorney. We need to talk tonight. Possible forged signature. I didn't have full proof yet, but my instincts have rarely failed me. I returned to the table and looked at Parker. Do you remember whose name this house is under? I asked gently. He frowned. What are you talking about? I'm just curious, I said. Because someone seems to be acting as if everything here already belongs to them. Allison straightened. Parker and I are making long-term plans for the family, she said. I would think you'd be happy about that. I'm always happy when plans are built on respect, I replied. None of us raised our voices, but the distance between us was no longer just a few steps around a table. It was a line. Clear. I looked at Joyce again. She was still quiet, but her eyes had changed. No confusion now, only waiting. And I understood. Tonight would not end with a moldy tart or a stain of red wine. Tonight I would begin peeling back each layer until the truth had nowhere left to hide beneath the sparkling lights of this villa. That night, I didn't leave the party. I only left the table. I told Joyce I needed a few minutes in the study. She gave the smallest nod. After 45 years of marriage, a glance is enough. I walked down the long hallway toward the ground floor office. The music behind me stayed steady, as if nothing were cracking beneath the surface. Allison had already regained control of the rhythm. I could hear her laugh, polished, practiced, ready for cameras. The study door closed behind me, quieter now. Just the distant ocean wind and the low hum of the air conditioning. I turned on the security control screen. Clear frames came up. The dining table, the balcony, the bar, the corner where Joyce was sitting. The camera above the table had recorded everything. The image sharp enough to show the mold on the tart. The audio clear enough to catch every word Allison whispered into Joyce's ear. I didn't replay it yet. I saved the file to a backup drive. My phone vibrated. My attorney Martin called back faster than I expected. I just saw your message, he said. What happened? I need you to review the property transfer documents Joyce signed 3 months ago, I said, especially the appendix regarding financial guardianship. A brief silence. What are you suspecting? I'm concerned that signature may not have been entirely voluntary, I replied. And I want to know if any updated copies were filed recently without my review. I heard papers shifting on his end. There was an addendum submitted 2 weeks ago, Martin said slowly. A proposal to adjust asset management authority in case of certified cognitive decline. I stood still. Certified by whom? A neurologist referred through Parker's office. I looked back at the screen. Joyce, sitting in the middle of a glittering party, being described as unstable. I did not approve any such amendment, I said. I know, Martin replied, but the addendum carries Joyce's signature. I closed my eyes for a moment. Joyce never mentioned this to me. Send me the scan. Now. The email arrived within minutes. I opened the file on the larger screen. It was Joyce's signature. But I have lived beside that woman for nearly half a century. I know the shape of her handwriting when her hand is steady, and when it trembles from fatigue. This signature was too smooth. I zoomed in on the final curve. No familiar break, no natural tilt. A stranger wouldn't notice. I did. Martin, I said, my voice lower now. If this signature is invalid, what are the legal consequences? If you can prove forgery or coercion under unclear conditions, he said, the entire filing can be voided, and those involved would face investigation. I said nothing more. I ended the call. Then I opened another folder in the system, one I had quietly started weeks ago, when I noticed Joyce seemed more exhausted after spending time around Allison. I reviewed the electronic medication logs. The dosage had been slightly adjusted over the past 7 days, not by our family physician. The request came from a secondary authorized account, an account Parker had registered. Reduced dosage, not by much, but enough for someone in the early stages of Parkinson's to feel slower, less focused. I sat down, not because I was shocked, but because the picture was now complete. The moldy tart was not impulsive. The wine spill was not an accident. The whispers about declining memory were not casual remarks. It was a script. If Joyce were perceived as cognitively impaired, adjusting asset control would appear reasonable to outsiders. And to the partners standing out there tonight, Parker would look like the responsible son stepping up. I switched the camera to the bar area. Allison was standing close to a man I recognized, Daniel Parker's fund manager. Too close for a routine business conversation. The look they exchanged wasn't professional. I rewound footage from the previous week. Daniel arriving at the villa one afternoon while Parker was absent, staying longer than a standard financial meeting would require. I didn't jump to conclusions. I simply saved the clips. A good judge never rules on instinct alone, but he never ignores instinct while gathering evidence. I began building a presentation file. Slide 1, tonight's tart enlarged. Slide 2, the audio clip. If you don't cooperate. Slide 3, the scanned signature, compared to Joyce's authentic ones, from older documents. Slide 4, the medication adjustment log. Slide 5, video of Daniel visiting outside official schedule entries. No commentary. Just facts. Standing on their own. When I finished, the music outside shifted to a slower song. Perhaps it was time for the candles. I looked at my reflection in the darkened screen. I have sentenced strangers in my lifetime. Tonight, I was preparing to face my own son. I didn't feel explosive anger, only something clear and steady. This had gone too far to be handled with gentle reminders. I stood taking the central system remote with me. Before opening the door, I paused for 1 second. From this moment on, my family would not be the same. But if I remained silent, Joyce would slowly be pushed out of her own life. In a house others were already calculating how to claim. I opened the door. Applause rose as Allison prepared to blow out the candles, and I understood it was time for the real gift of this evening to be opened. The applause was still echoing when I stepped back into the living room. Allison stood in the center in front of an elaborate multi-tiered birthday cake. Candlelight softened her face, just enough to hide the tension I had seen on the screen minutes earlier. Parker stood beside her, his hand resting lightly at her back. Protective. The partners, friends, summer neighbors, all waiting for the candles. I didn't raise my voice. I have a small gift, I said, just loud enough for the sound to carry across the room. Allison turned toward me, surprised, but still smiling. You really don't have to. I think everyone will want to see this, I continued. I lifted the central system remote. The large screen at the end of the room prepared to show a birthday montage for Allison's 32nd year flickered on. For a brief second, I saw confidence in her eyes. She probably assumed I was about to play a tribute. The video began. No music, no effects, just a close-up of tonight's table. Allison sliding the plate toward Joyce. Clear audio. If you don't cooperate, people will think you're unstable. The room went silent. No one spoke. A few guests exchanged glances. Parker froze. Allison kept smiling for the first few seconds, as if her mind hadn't caught up with what was happening. The screen shifted. Joyce's signature enlarged, placed beside an older, authentic one. No commentary, just the two images side by side. Then the medication adjustment log. Then the clip of Daniel entering the villa one afternoon, the timestamp visible in the corner. I heard someone inhale sharply. Allison stepped back. "What are you doing?" she asked. Her voice no longer soft. "I'm presenting a few materials," I said calmly. There seemed to be misunderstandings tonight. Parker stepped forward, reaching for the remote. "Dad, turn it off. We can talk privately." "We've had opportunities to talk privately," I replied. "Many times." I played the final clip, Allison's voice from earlier that evening, describing Joyce as forgetful in front of guests. Nothing more was needed. The screen went dark. The air felt heavy enough that I could hear the wind outside the glass doors. Allison turned toward the guests, forcing a laugh. "This is just a misunderstanding. My father-in-law can be a little sensitive." "I'm not sensitive," I said evenly. "I simply don't tolerate distortion of the truth." I walked to the side table where I had left the plate. I lifted it. Under the lights, the mold was unmistakable. "Tonight," I said, "someone claimed this dessert was good for health, good for memory." I looked directly at Allison. "If that's true, perhaps you'd like to demonstrate." She stiffened. "You can't be serious." "I'm very serious," I replied. "Or you can explain why it was placed in front of Joyce." Parker cut in. "You're blowing this out of proportion. No one was harmed." I turned to him, reducing her medication without notice, filing amendments to shift financial control, creating an image of cognitive decline in front of your partners. "You call that no harm?" Parker said nothing. Allison's hands tightened. "Are you threatening me?" she asked. "I'm offering a choice," I said. We resolve this within the family. You acknowledge the misconduct and withdraw every filing. Or I forward these materials to the appropriate authorities for review. I didn't need to raise my voice. The word review carried enough weight. Several guests began edging toward the door. No one wanted involvement. Allison looked around. She saw the change in their eyes. No more admiration, only distance. Suddenly, Parker dropped to his knees in front of me. "Dad, please, don't do this. I'll fix it. I promise." I looked at my son, the boy who once sat on my shoulders watching fireworks at 8 years old. "Since when did you believe repair begins with a promise?" I asked quietly. I placed a thin folder on a nearby table. Martin had sent the draft just minutes earlier. "This is a formal renunciation of inheritance rights," I said, "and a confirmation that Joyce retains sole authority over her personal assets. You may sign now." Allison stared at Parker. "You can't. I have to," Parker whispered. I didn't push. I simply stood there. Finally, Parker took the pen. His hand trembled, not from illness. He signed. Allison did not. But she stepped back, as if the wall behind her had sealed every exit. I set the plate down in front of her. "You don't need to eat it," I said slowly. "Just look at it. Sometimes decay isn't on the surface. It's in how we treat those who are weaker." She said nothing. I walked to the smart control panel and unlocked the main gate. "The party ends here tonight," I told the guests. "Thank you for coming." No one objected. They left in silence. As the room slowly emptied, I glanced back once more. The candles on the birthday cake were still burning, and I understood. Sometimes what must be extinguished is not the small flame in front of you, but the illusion that has been quietly burning for far too long. The candles on the cake finally went out. No one blew them. The ocean wind swept in as the front doors opened, carrying away the footsteps of the last guests. They didn't look back. In their world, other parties would go on. Other photos would be posted. But tonight, the image that would stay with them would not be Allison's glittering dress. It would be the silence. Parker stood in the middle of the room. The signed papers still rested on the table. He wasn't looking at me anymore. Allison stood a few steps away from him, arms crossed, as if a sudden chill had filled the air. I said nothing more to either of them. I turned to Joyce. "Let's go rest for a while," I said. She nodded. I guided her across the wide room that only hours earlier had been filled with laughter. The marble floors reflected soft golden light. Everything was still elegant, but it no longer felt the same. In the bedroom, I helped Joyce change out of the wine-stained dress. She sat on the edge of the bed, breathing slowly. "I didn't want it to go that far," she said quietly. "I know," I replied. "I thought if I stayed silent, they would stop." I sat beside her. "Silence only convinces people they can go further," I said. Tonight wasn't about a piece of cake. It was about the road ahead. She looked at me, gentle, but steady. "I'm not afraid of my illness," she said. "I'm afraid of becoming a burden." I took her hand. It trembled slightly, but it was warm. "You have never been a burden," I said, "and you never will be." We sat there for a long time. No more words were needed. When I returned to the living room, Parker and Allison were gathering a few personal belongings. The confidence was gone. Only awkwardness remained. Dad Parker said, his voice rough, "I was wrong." I looked at him. Wrong about what I asked. He was silent for several seconds. "For letting it go too far." I nodded. "Recognition is the first step," I said. "But responsibility doesn't end there." I notified security that starting the next morning, Parker and Allison's access credentials would be revoked. No drama, no raised voices. Just a quiet update in the system. Allison said nothing. She looked around the villa one last time, the place she once told friends she would soon inherit. I didn't argue. I simply said, "A house belongs to the ones who know how to protect it." They left before midnight. The gate closed behind them with a soft click. I stood alone on the balcony for a while. The sea was dark, but calm. I thought about my years on the bench, about judgments I had handed down to strangers. Tonight, I didn't sentence anyone. I simply restored a boundary. The next morning, I called Martin. "I want to finalize the foundation paperwork," I said, "for early-stage Parkinson's patients, focused on family support and legal guidance." He was quiet for a few seconds. "Are you sure?" he asked. "I am," I said, "and I want this house transferred into the foundation." It wasn't an impulsive decision. I understand the value of oceanfront property, But I also understand that holding on to it just to prove power leaves nothing lasting. A few weeks later, the sign at the gate was replaced with the foundation's name. We moved into a smaller house in the suburbs, closer to the hospital, closer to a park. No grand chandeliers, no marble floors, but a small garden in front, and a bench where Joyce could sit and read in the afternoon. I installed extra handrails in the bathroom myself. I rearranged my schedule so I would always be home in the evenings. Some changes are quiet, but they carry weight. One morning, just after sunrise, I helped Joyce out to the back porch. She watched the light filter through the trees and smiled. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "I regret not seeing it sooner," I said, "but I don't regret my decision." We sat side by side, listening to birds and the soft wind. Wealth can build a large house, but respect is what keeps a home standing. I don't know what path Parker will choose from here. I haven't closed the door forever, but I have closed a chapter where silence was mistaken for acceptance. I looked at Joyce. "In this house," I said softly, "we don't keep what has already decayed, and we don't let anyone convince us we are worth less." She rested her head on my shoulder. "The ocean is farther away now, but I've learned dawn looks the same anywhere, when you know you are protecting what is right." If this story makes you think about how we treat our parents, our spouse, or the more vulnerable members of our family, I hope you'll share it. Somewhere, someone may need the courage to speak up and draw a line. Subscribe, like, and share, so I know stories like this still matter to you. Family isn't held together by money or reputation. It's held together by respect and kindness. Thank you for listening all the way to the end.